They say a mother's hands never forget the weight of her child, even when the child forgets the warmth of her touch. Margaret's hands had built castles out of dust not for herself, but for a boy who one day would call her old, unneeded and outdated. Margaret sat by the window that morning, the faint hum of the city beyond her cracked glass. The sunlight fell weakly on the wooden floor, where her slippers had worn the polish down to pale streaks. The old clock on the wall ticked faithfully, as if it were the only one still keeping her rhythm alive. Her hands, trembling slightly, rested on a mug of tea she'd made hours ago. It had gone cold long before she remembered to sip it. The phone lay on the table beside her, silent, lifeless. She had stopped checking it for messages a few weeks ago, not because she didn't care, but because she finally realized Michael didn't anymore years ago when dreams were still shared. There was a time when the house was filled with laughter, when little Michael ran barefoot through the hallway, chasing paper planes and shouting, "Mom, look, it's flying higher than the roof." Margaret would laugh, catching him before he tripped, her heart soaring every time he did. "You'll build real planes one day, my love," she'd whisper, brushing his hair off his forehead. "And when you do, promise me you'll take me on your first flight." Michael would grin, missing a front tooth, and say, "You'll be the first one I take, Mom. Promise." Back then they had nothing. The roof leaked, the fridge hummed louder than it should, and some nights dinner was just bread and butter with stories to fill the silence. But Margaret never complained. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices in the morning and sewing clothes late into the night. Her fingers bled sometimes, but she called them tiny sacrifices. Every stitch, every sleepless night was for one dream, Michael's dream. The cost of a mother's love. Margaret believed education was the ticket to a different world. She sold her wedding ring, the only thing she had left from her late husband, to pay for Michael's first year at university. The ring had been simple, worn and thin, but to her, it was a symbol of a love that had once promised forever. Letting it go hurt, but she told herself it's just a ring. But his future, that's everything. She never told Michael about it. He would never have known unless he had looked at her hands carefully, where the faint tan lines still remained. Letters and promises. When Michael went away for college, he called every night. He'd tell her about his classes, the people he met, the professors who said he had potential. Margaret listened like a child hearing a bedtime story, proud, amazed, and tearful. "You're doing it, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "You're building your dream." And every time he said, "I love you, Mom," she'd reply, "I love you more, my boy." But as the semesters passed, the calls became shorter, then fewer, then stopped altogether. The day he graduated, she wasn't there. She watched it online, the live stream freezing every few seconds, her old laptop barely holding the signal. But she saw him, her boy, standing tall in a black gown, holding the degree she had bled for. When his name was called, she clapped through tears. Alone in a small apartment, she whispered, "You did it, Michael. You did it, my love." He didn't call that day a new city, a new life. Michael got a job in the city, a big company, high salary, polished shoes, and people who spoke with confidence and forgot where they came from. At first Margaret believed he was just busy. She told her neighbors proudly, "My son is working with big people now." She'd smile, holding her chest, repeating his name like a prayer. But months turned into years. Michael's visits grew shorter, his excuses longer. When he did come, he'd stay at a hotel, saying, "Mom, your place is too small, and I have meetings to attend." The small house that once held their laughter now only held echoes. Margaret still cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken with mashed potatoes. Every time he said he might come, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he canceled last minute, and sometimes he forgot to tell her at all. The forgotten hands. One day, Margaret decided to visit him instead. She took a long bus ride, clutching a small bag, a sweater she had knitted for him, and a jar of his favorite homemade pickles. When she reached his apartment, a tall building with glass walls and polished floors, the receptionist looked her up and down. "Do you have an appointment?" She smiled shyly. "I'm his mother." It took 15 minutes before Michael came down, his face tight, his smile strained. He wasn't angry, just embarrassed. "Mom, you should have called. I wanted to surprise you," she said softly. "I brought you something." She held out the jar, but he didn't take it. "Mom, I can't really bring homemade food inside. You know how these offices are." Her hands trembled. "It's okay. You can keep it for later." He looked around, aware of people watching. Then he sighed. "I'll call you later, okay? I'm really busy right now." And before she could say another word, he hugged her quickly, the kind of hug that ends before it begins, and walked away. The jar slipped from her hands and shattered on the marble floor. The smell of pickles filled the air. Margaret stood there, staring at the broken glass, a piece of her heart among it, the echo of silence. That night, she sat by her window again, staring into the city lights far away. She realized those lights were his world now, bright, fast, unreachable. Her world was quiet, slow, fading, but even then, she whispered his name in her prayers. God, protect my boy. Even if he forgets me, don't let him forget himself. She didn't know that far away. In a penthouse surrounded by glass and success, Michael couldn't sleep either. Not because of guilt, but because he didn't want to remember. The more he remembered her hands, the harder it was to pretend he built his dreams on his own. Success has a strange silence, the kind that drowns out laughter, love, and memories. Michael had everything a man could want, but nothing that could hold him when the nights grew too long. Because sometimes, it isn't loneliness that hurts, it's the realization that you pushed away the one person who would have loved you anyway. Michael's office glowed in the silver light of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked down on traffic that moved like veins of light beneath him. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes on the skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. He just signed a deal worth millions. Reporters were calling him the face of modern innovation, yet when his team raised their glasses, his smile never reached his eyes. Congratulations, sir, said Rachel, his assistant, placing a file on his desk. Thanks, he replied absently. Anything else you need before I go? He shook his head, and when she left, the office fell silent. He opened the top drawer. Inside was a faded photograph, a young boy on a woman's shoulders, both laughing as wind blew through their hair. His mother, Margaret, had her arms wrapped tightly around him, as if protecting him from the whole world. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. It made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand anymore. He turned it face down. The shadow behind success. At 32, Michael had wealth, a luxury apartment, and a name people respected. But with each achievement, something inside him grew quieter. He had dinners with investors, not friends. He had followers online, not people to call when the world felt heavy. He had women who admired his success, not one who cared if he slept or ate. Every success came with applause. Every night came with silence. Sometimes when he sat alone after midnight, the hum of the city outside reminded him of the sewing machine's rhythm, his mother's old singer machine. Working late into the night, he could still hear it thuck thuck thuck. A heartbeat made of thread and sacrifice, but he'd never admit that to anyone. So instead, he poured another glass of whiskey and scrolled through his messages. There were 100 clients, partners, journalists, none from her. None from the woman who'd once waited hours just to hear his voice. And for a brief, unbearable second, he wondered if she was okay. Then he shook his head and buried the thought. Margaret's quiet days miles away. Margaret's world had shrunk into a few rooms. The old sewing machine stood by the window, now more a memory than a tool. Her fingers had grown stiff, her eyes weaker. The doctor said she needed rest, but how does a mother rest when her heart never stops working? Every morning she sat by that same window watching the mailbox. Sometimes she'd whisper, maybe today. When a letter came, it was never from him. Bills, notices, advertisements. The only one that mattered never arrived. Her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, would drop by sometimes with fresh bread or soup. You should call him, dear, she'd say kindly. Margaret smiled. He's busy. He'll call when he can. But even as she said it, her eyes betrayed her heart. Because deep down she knew people make time for what matters. The missed call. One rainy night, Michael sat by the large glass window of his apartment, scrolling through his contacts. His thumb hovered over Mom. It had been months, maybe a year, since he last called. He couldn't remember exactly. The longer he waited, the harder it became to reach out. He told himself she was fine. He sent money every few months. Surely that meant he cared, but love doesn't come through bank transfers, and guilt doesn't buy forgiveness. Still, something pushed him to press call. The phone rang once, twice, then a soft, tired voice answered. Hello? He froze. It wasn't the voice he remembered. This one sounded thinner, older, softer. Mom? A small pause. Michael? She said his name like a prayer that had finally been answered. I just wanted to check in. Been busy, I know. Sweetheart, I know. How are you? I'm good. Work's crazy. That's wonderful, she said, her voice brightening. You're doing what you always dreamed of. He nodded, though she couldn't see him. The silence between them stretched. He felt it pressing down like a weight. Are you eating well? She asked finally. Yeah. You don't need to worry about me. You know I will, no matter what. For a moment he wanted to say something real. To tell her he missed her. To apologize for not calling sooner, but the words died in his throat. Listen, Mom, I've got to go, meeting early tomorrow. Oh, of course, she said quickly, hiding her disappointment. Thank you for calling, dear. You made my day. He hung up before he could hear the tremble in her voice. When the past calls back weeks later, Michael was giving a speech at an industry conference when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Finally, during a break, he answered. Hello? A voice spoke gently. Is this Mr. Michael Davis? Yes, this is Dr. Patel from St. Mary's Hospital. It's about your mother. The world stopped moving, the sound of the crowd faded. His pulse roaring in his ears. What happened? He managed to whisper. She's stable now, but she had a minor stroke. We tried reaching you earlier. He didn't remember the rest of the conversation. The next thing he knew, he was in his car driving through the rain, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The return when he entered the hospital room. Everything felt smaller, the bed, the lights, even the air. Margaret lay there, frail and pale, her hands resting lightly on the blanket. Those same hands that once held him steady now looked like paper-thin, fragile, trembling even in rest. Mom, her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw him, she smiled. You came, she whispered. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. Of course I came. She reached out, and he took her hand. It was cold, yet familiar. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I should have been here. I should have called more. She squeezed his fingers weakly. You're here now, my boy. That's all that matters. But even as she said it, he could see the truth in her eyes. She had waited too long for that moment. That night, as she slept, Michael sat beside her, holding her hand and staring at the faint scars on her fingers, the ones from the sewing needle, the ones that built his future, the ones he forgot. He remembered every sacrifice, the long nights, the cold dinners, the goodbye at the bus stop, and for the first time in years, he wept like a child. The quiet apology. When Margaret woke, she found him still there, asleep beside her bed, holding her hand like he used to when he was little. She smiled faintly. You still hold on tight when you're scared, she whispered. He opened his eyes. I thought I'd lost you. I'm still here, she said softly. But Michael, promise me something. Anything. Don't let the world make you forget who you are, or where you came from. He nodded, tears streaming silently. I promise. Some houses remember. They remember laughter, footsteps, lullabies whispered into the walls, and the silence that followed when love walked away. When Michael stepped back into the home his mother once filled with dreams, he realized success had bought him everything except peace. The drive back to his childhood home was quiet, except for the whisper of rain against the windshield. The road wound through streets that had once been familiar, now overgrown, faded, forgotten, just like the woman who had waited here for him. Michael parked in front of the small brick house, the one with the white fence that had lost most of its paint. The curtains were still the same, so was the mailbox, slightly bent from when he crashed his bicycle into it as a boy. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, before stepping out. The smell hit him first, a mix of dust, old books, and faint lavender. It was the scent of childhood frozen in time inside. Everything looked smaller, quieter. The walls were lined with photographs, his school pictures, his graduation, even a newspaper clipping of his first company's launch. And in every frame Margaret's eyes followed him, proud, gentle, full of warmth. He ran his fingers across one photo. The two of them sitting on the porch, laughing at something he could no longer remember. His throat tightened. He whispered, I should have been here. The empty kitchen. The kitchen still had the same wooden table, the same kettle, the same clock that ticked a little too fast. On the counter sat a jar of sugar, half empty. Next to it, a cup, her favorite one, with small blue flowers on the rim. Michael picked it up carefully, his chest aching at the thought of how many mornings she must have sat here alone, waiting for his calls that never came. He turned around slowly, letting the silence speak. Every corner told a story he had missed. The old sewing machine still stood by the window, covered with a cloth. He walked toward it, lifted the cover, and saw a half-finished piece of fabric, a sweater, small and warm-looking, in the shade of navy blue. A note pinned beside it read, for my Michael, maybe he'll need it one day. His breath caught in his throat. He sank into the chair beside the machine, his fingers tracing the threads she had left behind. Each stitch looked like a heartbeat, fragile, but full of love. The neighbor's visit. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Mrs. Jenkins, a short, round woman in her 60s, holding a basket of muffins. Oh my goodness, Michael Davis? She gasped. It's been years since I saw you. He forced a small smile. Hi, Mrs. Jenkins, she told me you were doing big things in the city, the woman said, stepping inside. But I didn't think I'd see you back here. Michael nodded awkwardly. Mom's still in the hospital, I heard, she said softly, her eyes kind. She talked about you every single day, you know, always saying how proud she was. He looked down. Even when I didn't call? Especially then, Mrs. Jenkins replied gently. She used to say, he's busy making the world a better place. I think she needed to believe that. He felt something crack inside him, the kind of pain that no success could dull. Mrs. Jenkins placed a hand on his arm. You're here now. That's what she always prayed for. The box of letters. That night, while cleaning his mother's room, Michael found a wooden box beneath her bed. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to him but never sent. He opened one. My dearest Michael, I know you're busy, but I just wanted to tell you that I made your favorite pie today. It didn't turn out as good as when you're here to taste it, but maybe next time you visit. Love, Mom. Another letter. You haven't called lately, and that's okay. I know work takes a lot of your time. I just hope you're eating well and not skipping sleep like you used to before exams. I miss your voice. And another. Your birthday's tomorrow. I baked a small cake just in case you drop by. I'll keep the porch light on. Michael pressed his hand against his mouth as tears streamed down his face. Dozens of letters, each one a quiet cry into the void. Waiting for an answer that never came, he stayed there all night, reading them one by one until the sunrise crept through the curtains, painting the room in gold. The hospital again. The next morning he went straight to the hospital. Margaret was awake, propped up on pillows, her face brighter than before. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. You came early today, he smiled through tears. I went home, Mom. Her expression softened. Oh, my little house. It missed you, I know, he said quietly. And I missed it too. She looked at him for a moment, studying the face she once used to kiss goodnight. You've changed, she said gently. But your eyes, they're still my boys. He swallowed hard. Mom, why didn't you tell me you wrote those letters? She smiled faintly. Because I wanted you to come when your heart missed me, not when my words forced you to. That broke him completely. He took her hand and pressed it against his cheek. I don't deserve you. Margaret chuckled softly. Mothers don't love because their children deserve it. We love because it's the only thing we know how to do. The small garden. Over the next few weeks, Michael stayed by her side. He extended his leave from work and began repairing her home, repainting walls, fixing the fence, planting flowers in the small front garden. Every nail he hammered felt like a prayer. Every corner he cleaned felt like an apology. Sometimes he'd talk to her while she rested. He'd tell her about his childhood memories, the kites they flew, the nights she read him stories. And she'd smile, eyes half closed, listening as if those moments were happening all over again. One afternoon, while watering the flowers, Michael said, Mom, I think I finally understand what success really means. She looked up from her chair on the porch. Oh, what does it mean to you now? He smiled softly. It's not about how high you climb. It's about who's still holding your hand when you reach the top. Her eyes filled with tears. Then you've already succeeded, my son. The unspoken fear. But as the days went on, Michael began to notice things. The way her hands trembled a little more each morning. The way her breathing grew shallow when she laughed too hard. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. She's stable for now. He tried to stay strong, but every smile she gave him felt like a goodbye she didn't want to say yet. So he made her a promise silently, in his heart, that no matter what happened, he would never let her feel forgotten again. The memory she left him with. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Margaret called him to her bedside. Michael, she said softly, I want you to do something for me. Anything, Mom, when I'm gone. Promise me you'll live a life that would have made those hands of mine proud. He held her hand tightly, trying not to cry. You're not going anywhere, she smiled. We both know every story has an ending, my love. But not every ending is sad. Some are just peaceful. Her words lingered in the air like a final lullaby. That night, Michael sat by her bed, holding her hand as she drifted into sleep. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow but steady, and whispered, Rest, Mom. I'll build the rest of my dreams in your name. Outside, the wind carried the scent of her garden. Jasmine, roses, and rain. Felt like home again. Some goodbyes don't happen in words, they happen in the way a hand slips from yours. In the silence between two heartbeats. In the air that suddenly feels too still. That night Michael learned that even forever has a last breath. The hospital room was dimly lit, the soft hum of machines filling the silence. Michael sat by the window, the same spot where he'd spent every night for the past few weeks. The city lights blinked outside like distant stars, unreachable. Cold Margaret was asleep, her chest rising and falling slowly. Her face looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The doctors said she was improving, but he had begun to read the truth between their careful smiles. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and whispered to the quiet room, Please stay, Mom. I'm not done making it right. He had promised her laughter again, family dinners, walks in the garden, but promises were fragile things when time was running short. The morning light. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and golden. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw him her smile was gentle. You're still here, she whispered. Where else would I go? The said, trying to sound light. She chuckled weakly. Don't you have work? I do, he said, but it can wait. You're my work now. She smiled, that same smile that used to greet him after school. You always did make me proud, even when you forgot to call, she teased softly. He laughed through tears. I missed this, I missed you. She reached for his hand, her fingers tracing his knuckles the way she used to when he was a boy. You grew up too fast, my love. The world took you away before I was ready to let go. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said quietly. I thought if I became successful, you'd be proud. Oh, Michael, she whispered, her eyes glistening. I was proud the moment you took your first step. Everything after that was just a bonus. The photograph later that day, Michael went home to fetch a few of her things. As he walked through her room, he noticed a small frame by the bedside, a photo of them taken years ago. The one where he was holding a model airplane and she was laughing behind him. He remembered that day vividly. He had crashed the model minutes later. And she had said, "That's okay, my boy. Every fall just teaches you how to fly better next time." He smiled faintly and tucked the photo into his jacket pocket. He wanted her to see it again, to remember how their story had started long before success or distance. When he returned to the hospital, she was awake but quiet, staring out the window. "I brought you something," he said. Setting the photo on her lap, her eyes softened instantly. She traced the glass with her frail fingers. "Oh, you still remember this day," she murmured. "That was the day you said you built something the whole world would see. And you said you'd be right there watching." He whispered. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "And I will be. Always." The unspoken goodbye. That evening, Margaret's breathing grew shallower. The nurse adjusted her for and gave Michael a look he'd come to dread. The kind that said, "Prepare yourself." He sat by her bed, holding her hand tightly. "Mom. It's okay, you don't have to talk. Just rest." She smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you remember what I told you when you were little?" He nodded. "You told me never to give up." She shook her head gently. "No, I told you to love loudly, even when the world goes quiet." Her eyelids fluttered, and for a terrifying second, he thought she was gone. Then her fingers squeezed his one last time. "I love you, Michael, don't forget my hands." And just like that, her breathing stilled. The room fell silent. The machines began to hum a different rhythm, one that broke him open from the inside. The silence after. Michael didn't cry at first, he just sat there, frozen, staring at her face. She looked peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep after a long day's work. He pressed her hand to his forehead, whispering through trembling lips, "I remember them, Mom. I remember your hands. I remember everything." The nurse placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't move, because in that moment, letting go felt like betrayal. The funeral. Days later, the small church was filled with soft hymns and quiet sobs. Michael stood at the front, dressed in black, holding a folded piece of paper, a eulogy he had rewritten 100 times but still couldn't bring himself to read. When the pastor nodded, he stepped forward. His voice trembled, but he spoke anyway. "My mother, Margaret Davis, was not a woman of grand achievements or public recognition. But she built something greater. She built me." He paused, his throat tightening. She didn't have much, but what she did have, she gave her time, her strength, her dreams. Her hands worked until they couldn't anymore, and still she smiled. "Even when I forgot her, she never forgot me." He looked down at her photograph resting on the casket. "She once told me that love doesn't demand to be remembered, it just hopes to be felt. And I feel her everywhere." He couldn't finish, his voice broke, and he stepped away, tears falling freely. Outside, as the wind rustled through the trees, a single white petal drifted onto his shoulder. He looked up. The sun had broken through the clouds, warmed the empty house. When he returned home that night, the house felt too quiet but not empty. The air carried her laughter, her humming, her prayers whispered into the walls. He sat by the sewing machine again, running his fingers over the half-finished sweater. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed, "Thank you, God," he whispered, "for giving me a mother whose love I didn't deserve but needed more than anything." He closed his eyes, and in that stillness, he could almost feel her hand on his hair, her voice saying softly, "I told you I'd always be watching." The beginning of healing. In the days that followed, Michael began visiting her grave every morning. He'd bring fresh flowers, lavender, her favorite, and sit for hours, talking to her like she was still there. Sometimes he'd tell her about his work, sometimes he'd just sit in silence, and sometimes he'd bring his laptop and work beside her, as if she were his quiet partner again. The world saw him as a man who had lost everything, but Michael knew he had finally found what mattered. That night, as he sat by her grave watching the stars, he whispered, "Mom, you didn't just build my dreams. You built me. And I promise your hands will never be forgotten again." Above him, the stars flickered softly like hands waving from heaven. Grief is strange. It doesn't ask permission to stay. It moves into your chest, rearranges your heartbeat, and whispers the voice of the one you've lost in every quiet corner. For Michael, his mother's death wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of his awakening. The morning after the funeral, Michael sat on the porch of his mother's old house, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The sky was pale and wide, the world painfully ordinary. Everything looked the same fence, the same garden, the same chair where Margaret used to sit and wave at passing neighbors. But she was gone, and the house knew it. The air felt different now. Lighter, yet unbearably heavy. Michael hadn't slept much since that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her smiling, whispering something he could never quite hear. He thought of her words, "When I'm gone, promise me you'll live a life that would have made those hands of mine proud." And for the first time in years, Michael didn't want to go back to the city. He didn't want boardrooms, glass towers, or deals that meant nothing. He wanted to feel something real. The garden of promises he began with her garden. The soil was dry. The flowers wilted, weeds creeping through the corners. He rolled up his sleeves, dug his hands into the dirt, and started pulling the weeds out one by one. Every handful of earth reminded him of her, of how she used to hum softly while planting roses, of how she'd say, "Things only grow when you care for them." Every day by sunset, he was covered in dirt, sweat streaking his face. But when he looked at the small patch of revived soil, something inside him eased. That night, he placed a wooden sign in front of it: Margaret's garden, where love still grows. The letters of a mother. Over the next few days, Michael read through his mother's letters again, not with guilt this time, but with a kind of quiet reverence. Each one felt like a conversation they never got to have. In her words he found advice, laughter, hope, and between the lines he found her forgiveness. He decided to keep them all in a journal, the letters of Margaret Davis, but something stirred in him as he copied them out. He realized these letters weren't just meant for him, they were meant for anyone who had ever forgotten where they came from that night. An idea took root, a different kind of success. A few weeks later, Michael walked into his office for the first time since her passing. The staff looked surprised to see him. The man who had once been untouchable now looked softer, calmer. "Cancel the quarterly dinner," he told his assistant. "We're starting something new." He gathered his team in the conference room. "This company has made a lot of money," he began. "But I've realized money doesn't build dreams, people do. Especially the ones who believed in us when we had nothing." He paused, his voice steady. "I want to start a foundation in my mother's name. The Margaret Hands Foundation. We'll fund single mothers who are working to build a future for their children. Women who remind me of her." The room went silent. "Rachel," his assistant blinked back. "Tears. That's beautiful, sir." Michael smiled faintly. "She spent her life making sure I could dream. It's time I made sure someone else could too." The hands that keep building. Months passed. The foundation grew faster than he expected. Every week he received letters from mothers, students, families who had been helped. One letter read, "Your support gave my daughter a chance to study. I didn't think I'd ever see her smile again. Thank you." From one mother to another, Michael kept each letter carefully in a drawer right beside his mother's. Every time he signed a grant or approved a scholarship, he whispered quietly, "This one's for you, Mom." The same hands that once typed corporate contracts now signed hope into existence. The same man who once chased profit now built dreams, not with money, but with meaning. A visit from the past. One evening Mrs. Jenkins came to see him. She stood by the garden, smiling at the flowers in full bloom. "Your mother would be so proud," she said softly. He nodded. "I hope she knows." "Oh, she knows," the old woman said. "She always said her son would find his way back. She just didn't know it would take this much heartbreak." Michael smiled sadly. "She was right. As always." Mrs. Jenkins handed him something, a small envelope. "She asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to her." His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a short note in her handwriting. "My dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means I'm finally resting. Don't let sadness keep you from living, my boy. Remember, every dream you build is another seed from these old hands. Keep planting love, Mom." Tears blurred his vision. He pressed the letter to his heart and whispered, "I will, Mom, I promise." A speech to remember. A year later, Michael stood on stage at an event for the foundation. Cameras flashed, the audience applauded. But he wasn't nervous. He began simply, "My name is Michael Davis. Everything you see here, this building, this mission, this change began with a woman whose hands worked until they could no longer hold mine." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "She didn't have power, money, or fame, but she had love, and love, I've learned, is the greatest kind of legacy." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. "I forgot her once," he continued softly, "but she never forgot me. So all of this is my way of remembering her forever." The audience rose to their feet, and in that thunder of applause Michael felt something deeper, a quiet warmth, as if she was there beside him, clapping to the night sky. Again later that night, Michael drove to her grave. The sky was clear, filled with stars. He sat down, resting his hand on the cold stone. "Mom," he whispered, "they still shine, the stars, the garden, the people you touched without even knowing it. You were right. Love never dies. It just changes its shape." He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, one star burned brighter than the rest. It felt like her, a gentle reminder that she was still watching, still proud. He smiled through tears. "I hope heaven has a garden, Mom, because down here yours is still growing." Sometimes healing begins when you stop hiding the parts of your story that broke you. Because the same pain that once silenced you can one day teach the world how to love again. The night of the foundation's anniversary gala, Michael stood backstage, staring at the framed photo of his mother projected on the big screen. She was smiling, the same tired but beautiful smile that once waited for him in that small kitchen, the one he'd ignored too many times. He took a deep breath. Tonight wasn't about money or status, or redemption. It was about truth. He touched the photo lightly and whispered this time, "Mom, I'll tell them everything." The speech that changed everything. The hall was packed. Reporters, donors, partners, and hundreds of women the foundation had helped. But Michael didn't read from the paper in his hand. He spoke from his heart. "I spent most of my life chasing success," he began, his voice steady but low. "I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, and built big enough, I'd be worthy of pride." He paused. "But I forgot something. I forgot the hands that built my dreams long before I ever built anything." The audience was silent, leaning in. My mother, Margaret Davis, wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She raised me alone. She gave up her dreams so I could have mine. And somewhere along the way I forgot her." A murmur of emotion swept through the room. Michael swallowed hard. "When she passed, I found letters she wrote to me every birthday, every year. I forgot. She never stopped loving me. Never stopped believing I'd remember who I was." He looked out at the crowd, his eyes wet. "So tonight I want to tell every son, every daughter here, don't wait for loss to make you remember love. Don't let pride silence your gratitude. Say the words now while you still can." He lifted the paper at last, not to read, but to show them a small handwritten note taped to it, "Keep planting love. Mom." The audience rose, clapping, crying, standing together in a thunder that felt like forgiveness. And in that moment, Michael realized the story that once filled him with shame was now giving others courage to heal their own. The letters go public the next day. Media outlets covered the story. CEO shares emotional tribute to late mother, sparks global movement. The clip went viral, viewed by millions. But it wasn't fame he felt. It was peace. People began sending messages from around the world. "Your mother's words reminded me to call mine. I forgave my mother today after years of silence. Thank you for showing us that success means nothing without love." Michael read each message with trembling hands. He couldn't help but imagine his mother's proud, teary eyes reading alongside him. Soon, a publisher approached him wanting to turn the letters and his speech into a book. He hesitated at first, unsure if sharing something so personal was right, but then he remembered her note. "Keep planting." And so he did. "The hands that built my dreams." That became the title of his book, "The Hands That Built My Dreams." It wasn't a business memoir, it was a tribute, a collection of her letters, his reflections, and stories of mothers around the world who sacrificed everything for love. He wrote late into the nights, the same desk his mother once sat beside, sewing clothes for his school fees. The first chapter began simply, "My mother never built empires, she built character." When the book finally released, it became an instant bestseller, not because it was glamorous but because it was real. Every reader saw a piece of their own mother in Margaret Davis. One review read, "This book doesn't just make you cry, it makes you call home." And that, Michael realized, was all he ever wanted. The home that waited. Months later, he returned to his hometown again. The same small house stood waiting, the garden blooming wildly. He walked through each room slowly, every wall still whispering stories of her laughter, her sighs, her prayers. In the kitchen, the light fell across the table just the way it used to when she sat there writing letters. He sat down in her chair and smiled softly. "Mom, the world knows your name now," he said. "They know your story, they know your love outside." A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes by the window, the same melody she loved. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. The foundation's new mission, the Margaret Hands Foundation, expanded beyond his dreams. They opened training centers for single mothers, teaching them skills, education, and financial independence. Each center carried a plaque that read, "Dedicated to the hands that build dreams." At every inauguration, Michael made sure to tell his mother's story not as tragedy, but as a testament to love that never dies. The interview. One day a young journalist interviewed him for a feature titled "The Man Who Remembered His Mother Too Late." At first, he winced at the headline. But then he smiled. "Maybe too late is the wrong way to see it," he said gently. "Because love doesn't care about time. It waits. It forgives." The journalist asked, "If your mother could hear you now, what would you say?" Michael looked out the window, the sunlight catching the faint scars on his hands from working in the garden. "I'd say thank you," he said softly, "for every night you stayed up, every prayer you whispered, every dream you built with your bare hands. You didn't just raise a son, Mom, you built a man the promise fulfilled." That evening he visited the foundation's main campus. The staff and children were gathered for an event, a celebration of mothers. As he watched them laugh, share stories, and hold hands, he felt her presence again, not as memory, but as spirit. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You kept planting, Mom. And now look at your garden." And somehow, he could almost hear her voice in the wind. "That's what love does, Michael. It keeps growing even when we're gone." Healing isn't forgetting the pain, it's learning to live so gently that your love becomes someone else's reason to hope. The weight of quiet days. It had been almost 2 years since Margaret's passing. Michael sat on the porch of her old house, his house now the garden alive with flowers of every color she once planted. The sunset brushed the sky with gold and violet. The world had changed so much since she left. His book had become a global symbol of maternal love. The foundation had opened centers in 5 countries, and he was now invited to speak at events around the world, but success no longer filled the emptiness inside him. Peace did. He wasn't trying to prove himself anymore. He was trying to serve, to keep her legacy breathing. Yet sometimes when the evenings grew too quiet, he still found himself whispering, "Mom, am I doing this right?" And though the wind said nothing, the rustle of leaves always felt like her answer. The young man who reminded him of himself. One afternoon, while visiting a new center in Chicago, Michael met a boy 17, thin, with eyes that carried more weight than his shoulders could bear. His name was Ethan. Ethan sat alone in the corner, sketching something in a notebook while other kids chatted around him. Michael walked over. "Hey, that's beautiful," he said, pointing to the sketch. Ethan quickly shut the notebook. "It's nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." Michael smiled. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy muttered. Michael nodded. "I used to sit like that too, trying to disappear into the background." Ethan looked up skeptical. You're on TV?" Michael chuckled softly. "Yeah. But there was a time I didn't have much to say, especially to the person who loved me the most." Ethan's eyes softened, just a little. He whispered, "My mom's gone. Cancer." "I didn't even say goodbye." The words pierced Michael's heart like a mirror of his own story. He sat beside him quietly. "You know," he said after a long pause, "when my mom passed, I didn't get to say goodbye either. I thought I'd lost my chance forever." Ethan turned to him. "Did you ever forgive yourself?" Michael looked at the boy, his younger self reflected in that face. "I'm still learning," he said honestly. "But I've learned this forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. It just lets love breathe again." The workshop of memory. That evening, Michael gathered the children at the center for a new activity. "Tonight," he said, "we're going to write letters. Not to people here, but to the ones we miss." Some kids hesitated. Others reached for paper. Instantly Michael sat down with them. His letter began, "Dear Mom, today I met a boy who reminded me of myself, lost, scared, but full of quiet hope. I tried to tell him what you taught me. That love never dies, it just changes where it lives." When everyone finished, they stepped outside into the cool night air. A small bonfire flickered at the edge of the courtyard. "Now," Michael said softly, "we'll burn these letters. Not to forget, but to send them where love goes when words aren't enough." Ethan hesitated. Then he threw his letter into the flames, his lips trembling. The firelight reflected in his tears, and for the first time in years, Michael saw what healing looked like. Letting go without losing love. The letter that waited. A week later, when Michael returned home, a package was waiting at his door. No sender. Just a brown envelope. Neatly tied with string. Inside was a faded journal, its pages yellowed with time. He opened it carefully and froze. It was hers. Margaret's handwriting filled the pages. Old notes, prayers, half-written poems. On the last page, one line stood alone. "If my son ever finds this, tell him I'm proud of the man he's becoming, not for his success, but for his kindness." Michael's eyes blurred with tears. He pressed his forehead to the page, whispering, "I'm still trying, Mom." He placed the journal on her old chair by the window, where the morning sun always fell. It felt right, like her soul had finally come home. The quiet promise days turned into weeks. Michael began visiting the centers more often, not as a CEO, but as a mentor. He'd sit with the mothers, listen to their stories, help them fill out forms, or teach kids how to write thank you letters to their parents. He found peace in small acts, helping a mother find a job, teaching a child to read, planting flowers in the garden. Once, Rachel, his longtime assistant and now director of the foundation, said to him, "You know, Michael, you've become what she always was." He smiled. "What's that?" Rachel replied softly, "A builder of dreams." The interview that touched millions. Months later, Michael was invited to a global talk show. The host asked, "What do you think your mother would say to you now?" Michael took a deep breath. "She'd probably tell me to stop working so much and eat properly," he said with a small laugh. The audience chuckled. Then his tone softened. "But truly, she'd say, you finally understood. That love isn't proven by what you achieve, it's proven by how gently you give." The audience went silent. Michael continued, voice trembling, "My mother built my dreams with her hands. Now I spend my life trying to build someone else's, because that's what love looks like when it grows up." When the show aired, it reached millions. Comments flooded in, children calling their parents, parents hugging their kids, and once again, Margaret's love carried through. Her son healed the world. She'd never gotten to see the bench beneath the sky. That weekend, Michael returned to the same hill where his mother was buried, He brought a new wooden bench and set it near her grave. On the back he had engraved words from her final letter, "Keep planting." He sat there quietly watching the sky fade into dusk. The air was cool, the world hushed. He whispered, "I finally understand, Mom. You didn't just build my dreams, you built my heart." A gentle wind moved through the trees, and for a moment, he swore he heard her voice again, soft, warm, eternal. "Then my work is done, my son. There comes a moment when grief turns into gratitude, when you no longer cry because they're gone, but smile because they once loved you with everything they had." The final harvest. It had been 5 years since Margaret Davis passed away. The garden she once tended, the one Michael rebuilt, was now a sanctuary. Every petal, every leaf, every corner of that place carried her story. That morning Michael stood at the edge of the garden, sunlight spilling over the flowers. The foundation had grown beyond imagination. Schools, shelters, and skill programs for mothers across continents. And today was special. It was the opening of the Margaret Davis Learning Center, a place where single mothers could study, learn trades, and rebuild their lives. As volunteers arranged seats under the old oak tree, Michael took a deep breath. He could feel her everywhere, in the warmth of the light, in the laughter of the children, in the softness of the wind brushing his face. The speech of a lifetime. When it was time, Michael walked to the podium. He no longer needed notes. The words were written in his soul. He looked at the crowd, mothers, children, families, journalists behind him. A large mural of Margaret's hands, weathered, strong, and open, had been painted by one of the mothers the foundation helped. He began softly once. "I was a boy who believed success was something you could hold in your hands, but I've learned true success is what remains in your heart when everything else fades." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "My mother, Margaret Davis, built my dreams with nothing but love. She taught me that greatness isn't about what you earn, it's about what you give. These centers, these lives, these smiles, they are her work. I am just the continuation of her hands." The crowd listened in silence, tears shimmering across faces. "And if she could see this today," he said softly, "I know she'd say the same words she wrote in her final letter, keep planting us. So that's what we'll do for her, for every mother who believes love is enough." He stepped back and the applause rose like thunder. Children released white balloons into the sky, each carrying a small note of gratitude, and among those floating messages was one that read, "Thank you, Margaret, for building all our dreams." The unexpected visitor. Later that day, as the crowd dispersed, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous, holding a small boy by the hand. "Mr. Davis?" she said softly. "My name is Elena. This is my son, Noah. We're one of the families your foundation helped last year." Michael smiled warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." Elena hesitated, then handed him a drawing. It was of two hands, one large, one small, holding a heart. At the bottom, the boy had written in uneven letters, "For the man whose mom helped mine." Michael's eyes filled instantly. He knelt, taking Noah's tiny hand. "That's the best gift anyone's ever given me." The boy grinned. "My mom says your mom must be an angel now." Michael smiled through tears. "She is. And maybe she sent you here to remind me." The letter to the future. That night, back at his home, Michael sat by the window, the same one where Margaret used to dream aloud about his future. The journal she left him lay open on the table. He took a pen and began writing, not to her this time, but to whoever might one day feel lost like he once did. "Dear future dreamer, you don't know me, but I know your heart. Because once I was where you are, chasing success, forgetting love, and mistaking distance for strength. If you ever forget where you came from, pause. Remember the hands that fed you, the voice that believed in you, the heart that loved you before the world ever did. Build something beautiful, not for the world's applause, but for the person who taught you kindness. And if you ever lose your way, just remember what my mother told me. Keep planting." Michael Davis. He closed the letter, placed it inside the journal, and whispered, "Your story's safe with me, Mom." The garden under the stars. That night, the garden glowed under the moonlight. Michael walked barefoot through the flowers, listening to the quiet hum of crickets and the soft rustle of the trees. He stopped beside her favorite rosebush, now taller than him, and knelt down. In his hands he held a single white rose. "Mom," he said softly, "you're not gone. You just changed the way you love me." He planted the rose carefully in the soil, pressing his palms into the earth. It felt warm, alive, like her hands beneath his. He looked up at the sky, and for a brief, perfect moment, one star shimmered brighter than the rest. It was as if she was smiling. He whispered, "You built my dreams, Mom. Now I'll spend the rest of my life building others." The legacy of her hands. Years later, when Michael's own hair had begun to gray, people often introduced him as the man who changed lives. But he always corrected them gently. "No," he'd say with a smile, "I'm just the son of a woman who never gave up." At the entrance of the Foundation's headquarters, a bronze statue stood. Not of him, but of a pair of open hands holding a blooming seed. Beneath it an inscription read, "In honor of every mother who built a dream with her hands, and every child who remembered in time." Epilogue. The seed never dies. One spring morning as the sun rose over the city, Ethan, the boy Michael once mentored, stood in front of that same statue. He was now a teacher at the Foundation, carrying forward the same mission. He smiled, touching the inscription. "You kept planting, Mr. Davis," he whispered. "Now it's our turn." And somewhere beyond the clouds, two souls, a mother and her son, smiled down together. Because love once planted never really dies. Just keeps growing forever. The end.